Just before this video starts, I just want to quickly promote my Letterboxd. I got a bunch of lists on there. If you're interested in what I watch in these videos, then I usually do a quick review and I rate the film and I log it on Letterboxd. So if you want to check that out, please consider checking out my Letterboxd, I guess. It's another month! So let's look back at all the films and TV shows that I've watched in the month of November. So first, I rewatched Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. I was in a very Sam Raimi mood after watching the Evil Dead trilogy in October, so I decided to watch this trilogy again. I've mentioned this before, but I have an unbelievable amount of nostalgia for these films. And this first film is just so entertaining and charming. It's just so quotable. It might be a bit dated, but I don't care. I'm just blinded with nostalgia when it comes to this film. I give it like a 9.5. And then I rewatched Spider-Man 2. I'm probably blinded by nostalgia with this film as well, but I have to give it a 10. Just the pacing of everything, the action, the raindrops keep falling on my head montage, everything just works together to make such an entertaining watch. And then I finished watching Gen V. I thought this season was great and it might be up to the level of a season of The Boys. There's just some really well written characters in this show and a bunch of corrupt people, which I just love to see in The Boys, and a bunch of betrayals, which I also love to see in The Boys. We also get a lot of graphic imagery, which I obviously came to expect from other boys show. I just really loved it, and I think the finale was like balls to the walls crazy. I give it like an 8.5. Why is my voice like cracking? I can't. Then I finish off the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy with Spider-Man 3. I rewatched the editor's cut of the film since I prefer it to the theatrical version. Some scenes are like jigged around, and there's some like alternate and new scenes that just improve the film in general for me. And again, this is a film that I have unbelievable amounts of nostalgia for. It's probably the film I played most out of the trilogy. It's just over the top Sam Raimi goofy. And it's just the most fun and quotable out of the trilogy as well, in my opinion. I do think the third act has some pacing issues, and they keep cutting back to this British reporter who doesn't add anything apart from being British. But it does come to an open-ended conclusion to the trilogy that I like, even though it's planned to continue into a fourth film. And obviously Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man comes back in No Way Home. So yeah, but I give this one an 8.5. And then I rewatched season 1 of Invincible. Of course, I had to rewatch season 1 to prepare for season 2, and it's still probably in my top 3 shows of all time. It's up there with Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul for me. I've read a good amount of the comics now as well, and I find it really interesting how they change plot lines around, and they don't introduce a plot line until a certain point compared to the comics, but actually improves on the comics and just makes for a more compelling story. The finale is just one of the most well-written episodes of television that I've seen. I think it's just perfect. I give it a 10 out of 10. And then I watched Cobweb. This is a horror film that I didn't manage to get to last month, so I thought I'd watch it this month, and I thought it was a pretty well done horror movie that divert expectations a few times and kind of reminded me of Barbarian, with all these hidden locations in the house and having something living there. It's definitely not as good as Barbarian though. I thought the stuff with the parents was great. Anthony Starr just puts in another amazing performance in this film, which is a bit more subtler than Homelander obviously, but you're constantly questioning his next move, which makes this film so suspenseful. I think the third act destroyed that tension in my opinion though, and it just came to a really unsatisfying conclusion. The teacher really pissed me off as well, because she has multiple chances in this film to get help, either from the police or the people on the streets, but she just keeps coming into this creepy house on her own, and she's just asking to be killed. I think the first 2 acts are great, the third act not so much. I give it a 7. And then I watched You Hurt My Feelings. I went into this thinking it was going to be a wine mom comedy that I really didn't think was going to be my thing. I did actually enjoy a good amount of it, but it was a wine mom comedy. There were some actors that I didn't expect to be in this film, like the guy who stole the chipmunks, and the scenes with his character are really fun. The movie overall was pretty well written, and there's some running gags and things that come back around again later on in the film. There are some really cringe and cheesy moments though that I feel are directed more towards middle-aged people. I can still appreciate it though. I give it a 7. Speaking of 7, I watched 7. I went to watch some David Fincher films that are on streaming to prepare for The Killer. I already saw Alien 3 in 2021, and I watched Fight Club and The Social Network last year, but I haven't seen any David Fincher films apart from those, so I thought I'd start with one of his most praised films, and I really love this. Just the performances of everyone involved are just great, and where everything goes with the murders is just great. It just takes some mad twists and turns during the final act that just keep me on the edge of my seat. I've seen bits and pieces of the ending scene with the box, but not with the context, which just adds so much weight to everything, with how these characters were built up and fleshed out. There were some scenes where the movie would slow down for some like elongated conversations between characters, and I did lose some interest during some of those scenes. But most of the time, my eyes were glued to the screen. I give it a 9. And then I finished watching Loki season 2. This was just amazing. I do think it took a bit to find its footing, and I do think the pacing of the first half was a bit off. But the second half of the season probably tops the first in my opinion, and it probably just has one of the best finales I've seen to a show, full stop. Just some phenomenal performances throughout, and just such a great story. It's just almost perfect. Yeah, I give this a 9. I give it a 9. I give it a 9. I give it a 9. And then I watched Gone Girl. This was another David Fincher film I wanted to watch before The Killer, and this film I actually liked more than 7 in my opinion, and I think it's basically perfect. I was really put off by the runtime at first, being 2.5 hours, but the film really puts that runtime to use. And by the end, I didn't actually want the film to end. The performances from Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike were phenomenal, and like how it's very unclear what's going on at the start until it has that amazing reveal that happens not even halfway through the film, but it completely changes how you view these characters. And then by the end, you realise that both of these characters are pretty terrible people, leading to just a devastating ending that works so well. I give it a 10. And then I watched The Killer. This was a really solid Fincher film, but it's probably my least favourite of the films I've watched of his last month. Michael Fassbender puts in a great performance as this like emotionless person, and I really like how it takes you into like his day-to-day routine. Tilda Swinton was also a big standout in this film, even though she's in it for like 5 minutes. But her nature and the way she kind of gets to Michael Fassbender's character is like really great to see. I think the story itself does get a bit boring and repetitive after a while, with the killer pursuing all these people to get to more people, and the first half does it really well, but it just lost me a bit in the second half. It's still an extremely well made film that just has a David Fincher flair to everything. I give it an 8. And then I watched Bottle Rocket. I'm finally watching the last 2 Wes Anderson films that I haven't watched, and you can really tell that this is his debut film. His signature style is not prominent at all in this film, and the story is just not as engaging or as fleshed out as most Anderson films. I thought both of the Wilson brothers did a great job, and the dialogue was really fun, and it kind of reminded me of Uncut Gems a bit, with how everyone was like talking over each other. I do think it took a while to get going, and it really didn't gain my interest until the third act, but I think where the story went was pretty fun, and the ending was pretty satisfying as well. It's probably my least favourite Anderson film though. I give it like a 7. And then I watched Moonrise Kingdom. I found this film to be pretty heartwarming and nice with where the story goes. The whole scouts part of the story was great, and Anderson's style really worked in an environment like this. I like the addition of Bruce Willis's character as well, and it just goes in a great direction for the final act. The biggest standout of this film is obviously the 2 child actors, who just bring a lot of charm to the film and just add to the Anderson style. I feel like I'm waffling a bit here, but yeah, I give it a 9. And then I watched Past Lives. This film was just an emotional journey and just a beautiful film overall. First of all, this film is shot really well, and the use of lighting in this film is just great. The relationship between these 2 characters is just so well done with these performances, and it takes things in a really unexpected direction at the end. The way the story is told is just so intriguing, and the pacing is just on point. This film knows when to switch back and forth between these characters. There are some moments in this film that are very intentionally cringeworthy, because there's like this semi love triangle going on that just adds to the weight of the story. But I think it's just one of my favourite films of the year. I give it a 9.5. And then I watched The King of Comedy. Everyone's talking about the new Martin Scorsese film, Killers of the Flower Moon, so I thought I'd go back and watch some of his films that are on streaming. Believe it or not, I've never seen a Martin Scorsese film before, apart from Shark Tale, but he didn't direct that one. So this film was on Disney Plus, so I thought I'd give it a watch, and it actually turned out to be perfect. The performance from Robert De Niro in this film is great, and the story being told is just so expertly done. My eyes were glued to the screen with this film, and I was hanging off every piece of dialogue. It also went in a really unexpected direction that was surprisingly satisfying, and it just left me smiling for like a good 5 minutes after I watched the film, because it was that good. If I was to nitpick, there were some moments where the ADR didn't match up with the lips in some moments, but it didn't take me out of the film by any means. It's still basically perfect. I give it a 10. And then I watched Casino. This was another Martin Scorsese film that was on Prime, so I gave it a watch. And whilst I don't like it as much as The King of Comedy, it's still an extremely solid film. It is a pretty long film as well, at nearly 3 hours, but it paces itself really well, and I was just invested in these characters and the story just so much over the runtime. I was just really invested in the story and the characters so much, to where the ending itself felt satisfying, but also really devastating. The performances were obviously phenomenal, especially from Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, who I've only seen in Home Alone before this. And the rise and fall of these two characters and how they narrate everything is just so good. I do think there are some side plots and moments in this film that slightly lost my interest, but overall it's just another great Scorsese film. I give it a 9. And then I watched Gran Turismo. This was surprisingly better than I expected. I thought it was just going to be like a feature-length PlayStation ad, and although it was that at some points, most of the film was actually pretty interesting and works really well as a biopic. There was just some really great cinematography in this film as well. Just some great sweeping shots around the circuit as everyone's racing. It just looks really good. I also think the story being told of this racer is also pretty good, although I can tell a lot of things were over dramatized and didn't actually happen, and it does make for some really cheesy moments where they try to go for emotion and it just falls flat on its face. I found David Harbour's character to be a big standout in this film, as he brings a lot of charm to the film as he warms up to this racist. It's overall nothing special, but it's a decent biopic with solid acting. I give it a 7.5. And then I watched Murder on the Orient Express. I wanted to watch this trilogy of Kenneth Branagh, Agatha Christie adaptations for Haunting in Venice that came out this year, and this film just disappointed me. I liked the first 29 minutes or so. I thought Kenneth Branagh put in a really goofy performance as this detective, and there was some surprisingly good shots in this film that looked visually great. But once Johnny Depp's character gets murdered, this film just takes a nosedive in my opinion, and just becomes a really boring murder mystery that just kind of feels pointless by the end. The reveal is pretty interesting and fun at first, but then it just feels more and more stupid the more I think about it. I know it's based on a book and all, but I felt like this story could have just been approached so much better. There were some good moments in this film, especially at the start, and you got a stacked cast of pretty great actors, which make the boring scenes a little bit more tolerable, but overall it's just not as good as I thought it was going to be. I give it a 6. And then I watched Death on the Nile. I actually preferred this to the last film. There were some actually pretty fun moments in there involving the murder mystery, and Kenneth Branagh really played into this goofy detective character a little bit more in this film. There were some odd editing moments in this film where you'd have like a 30-second shot of these two people dancing, and then it would cut to something else for like half a second, then it would cut back, and it was just a bit odd. Also, there's multiple murders that happen in this film, which I like, but I found everyone apart from the first to be underwhelming, and then just dealt with really weirdly. It just get very boring again, with a lot of Kenneth Branagh's character interviewing people, and the problem is he's the main character, and we don't really get to see inside of his head and how he pieces together these murders. So to me the interview scenes are just pointless. Overall though, I think it's a much more fun time with another very stacked cast of great actors and Russell Brands, but I give it a 6.5. And then I watched Haunting in Venice. This is probably my favourite out of these films because I didn't get distracted by my phone nearly as much. The cast I found wasn't the main attraction of this film, which I liked, and I only really recognised Michelle Yeoh and obviously Kenneth Branagh, whereas the last two films had like a massive stacked cast. The supernatural aspect of this film is really fun. I just think the murder mystery was a bit more intriguing as well. I do still think that we should actually see Kenneth Branagh's character put things together and work out the murderer, rather than just have him suddenly work it out. And I don't know how to feel about the cinematography in this film. It's just very all over the place, and there's just one too many wide lens shots. There's an extremely goofy shot where Kenneth Branagh's getting drowned. Still though, I had a good time with it. I gave it a 7. And then I finished watching Futurama Season 2. This season took me way too long to complete. It took me like over a month, but I finally finished it, and it was a really solid second season. I think the writing and humour actually improved even more with this season, and there were some really fun concepts. The episodes have doubled in this season, which I don't know how to feel about, because it did result in some very forgettable episodes, but it also resulted in some of the best episodes of the show that I've seen so far, especially the season finale, which was kind of their show's version of Treehouse of Horror, which I love. Just the pacing of the jokes, along with the great sci-fi concepts, just make the season really great, and I'm really excited to see what they come up with for the next season. I give it an 8.5. And then I watched The Creator. This was much better than I expected it to be. It gave me a very similar feeling to District 9, with this post-apocalyptic society, and all the stuff with the robots kind of reminded me of the aliens from that film as well. I didn't find the main character to be all that developed or likeable at the start, but I feel like as this child gets introduced, his character really changes for the better, and at least there was a surprisingly emotional final act. The child actor in this film is really great at playing this very powerful robot, and she just shows a wide range of emotions, which a lot of child actors are pretty incapable of doing. The stuff with the robots is just great, and I really like their different designs, and the visual effects for them just look phenomenal. Better than any Marvel film made in the past few years. I didn't expect to like this at the start, but I feel like it progressively got better and better, and it's just a really good film. I give it an 8.5. And then I finished watching the first half of Invincible Season 2. I'm really annoyed that I have to wait till next year to watch the second half, but this first half was just so good. I don't think it's up to the levels of Season 1 so far, but after reading a good chunk of the comics, I think it adapts everything in all the right ways. Again, you just got stellar voice acting from an even more stacked cast. The animation of Phil is improved as well, and gives us some smoother and interesting to look at action scenes. Then you've also got this overarching plot with Angshom Levy, which I'm really excited to see how they adapt from the comics, because the issue where everything goes down, it's probably one of the best comics that I've read. I do think Mark isn't as likeable as in Season 1. He's much more like defensive and angry, which I get after what he went through, but he can get a bit annoying. Also, I don't think the teen drama aspect is dealt with as well as in the first season. It's just a bit oddly paced so far. Apart from that, it's a super exciting season of television, and I just can't wait to see what happens in the second half. I give it an 8.5. And then I watched Reptile. This was very boring. I thought it was going in an interesting direction at the start, building up to Justin Timberlake's wife getting murdered, but then it just went into an oddly paced, weirdly edited crime drama with a pretty one-note performance from Benicio del Toro, in my opinion. I just couldn't connect with any of these characters, and I just completely lost interest because of it. The film did slightly regain my interest a bit in the final act of the film, when someone actually shoots a gun, but then it leads to this really odd ending that doesn't even feel like an ending. Justin Timberlake was decent in it, and I was mostly interested in his character and his mental issues after losing his wife, but hardly any of that is explored or resolved, and it just focuses on this boring detective. I feel like I'm hating on this film too much, but I'm just not the biggest fan of it. I give it a 5.5. And then I finished watching Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. A lot of people are talking about this show, and I only watched the movie earlier this year, so I thought I'd give it a watch, and it was a very pleasant surprise. I only watched one trailer and expected it to be a retelling of the events in the film, and it seemed to be that way for the first episode, and then Scott supposedly dies, and it focuses on the side characters. It really shocked me with how different the story was, and how it was on the same level as the film. Obviously, you got the same voice actors returning, and they did a great job, and the anime style works so well for this world, and I'm surprised they didn't do this sooner. The animation just looks beautiful and amazing in moments. I just love where the story went compared to the film as well, and how it has that unique story and style to it. I give it a 9. And then I watched Doctor Who The Star Beast. I'm a pretty general fan of Doctor Who, even though I have these. I got Cyberman, and then I got an Ood. I grew up watching the Matt Smith era Doctor Who, which I remember loving, and I also remember watching a good amount of the Peter Capaldi episodes as well, including the finale of his character. And then about 4-5 years ago now, I went back and watched all of the Christopher Eccleston stuff and the David Tennant stuff, which I absolutely loved. So I was really interested to check these episodes out, and it was fun. It's obviously great seeing David Tennant return back in the role of the Doctor, as well as Catherine Tate returning as Donna. They're just such a great duo, but I don't think the story going on around these characters is all that great, and it gets very cheesy in moments, which does kind of remind me of the earlier seasons of the show, but some of the less liked episodes of the earlier seasons of the show. I feel like the whole appeal of this episode was just seeing these two characters together, and that aspect is really great, but everything else is not really that special. I give it a 7. And then I watched Belfast. This was a Kenneth Branagh film that was nominated for a bunch of Oscars a few years back, and I watched a bunch of Kenneth Branagh films earlier that week, so I thought I'd watch this film considering it was on Netflix. And it's the best film I've seen from him, I think. The story being told here is really investing, with a lot of weight and emotion to it. The actors in this film all do a great job. It just feels a lot like Oscar bait, from the black and white to the odd cinematography, where it's just being stylised for the sake of being stylised. I think the biggest issue with this film is the editing. Scenes would just end unnaturally and start unnaturally, while it seems like a character is about to speak or has already spoken, and it just kind of takes me out of the film and like detaches me from this world. I feel like it should put the audience in these characters' shoes, but instead it just feels like we're looking at this place as an outsider, which just didn't work that well for me. It is very well made though, and I can tell Kenneth Branagh has a lot of passion for the story being told here. I give it a 7. And then I finally got to Oppenheimer. This film is definitely in like the top 5 of the year for me, I think. It's extremely well paced for the 3-hour runtime, and it uses that runtime to its advantage. It's definitely only a dialogue-based film, but I'm feeling like I'm hanging off every piece of dialogue. It's just so well written. I knew nothing about this story going into it, apart from that a bunch of people died due to this guy's actions, and it does a really good job at showing Oppenheimer's rise to power and how he managed to build this bomb. I really love the surreal imagery in this film, especially after the bomb's dropped and all of these people, and he has to deal mentally with the consequences. Just the imagery associated with that was just so disturbing, and it really brings you into this character's world. I do think all the court drama stuff was a bit confusing though, and although I liked how it wasn't all chronological, I think it lost me on some elements, but that's probably because I have a pea-sized brain. It's not the film's fault. I give it a 9.5. And then I watched The Equalizer. I wanted to watch this for The Equalizer 3, which came out in 2023 this year, so I gave this first film a watch. It was on Netflix. I found the first half to be really fun, with how you see Denzel Washington's character going about his daily life as this nice smiley old man, and then by night he's this hard serious killer. I thought that worked really well, but with the second half it's just that hard serious killer side to his character, and it just makes him really generic and one note for the second half. It just devolves into this generic action by the end as well, whilst at the start it had all this goofy editing where Denzel Washington's character is analysing the room and calculating how much time it would take to kill these people. That aspect is really fun, and I just wish we saw more of that. Overall though, it's a fun time, but it's pretty generic. I give it 7. And then I watched The Equalizer 2. I don't really have much to say about this film. It's just pretty boring. Pedro Pascal was in it, but he's actually surprisingly forgettable, which is a shame. So yeah, I give it 6. And then I watched The Equalizer 3. This might be equal, see what I did there, to the first film in terms of quality. I thought the setting in this film was really good, and it ups the gore of the last two films, which makes some really fun action scenes. I do think this film is poorly paced though, and I swear nearly half of this film is just Denzel Washington walking around and drinking tea. There's not really a lot of action in it until the third act, which builds up to this climax, which I like, but also it's not really that engaging. Again though, I think this is on the same level as the first in terms of story and the overall enjoyment I had with this film. I give it another 7. So those are all the films and TV shows that I watched in the month of November. I'm currently watching Rick and Morty season 7. I'm only really watching episodes of this season that people like and they're talking about, which is episodes 4, 5 and 6 so far, and I like them all. The new voice actors are surprisingly really good, and they work better than Justin Roiland in my opinion, because they can bounce off of each other obviously, and one voice actor can't do that. The sci-fi concepts are great again, and I'm interested to see if there's any more gems in this season. I'm also watching through Futurama season 3 now as well. I'm still going to watch up to season 5 of this show. I like this season so far. Just again, some great sci-fi concepts and really fun